The city lay sprawled like a living story, a place where skyscrapers reflected sunlight while ancestral clay homes hid in the shadows of narrow alleys. The streets hummed with the chatter of merchants, the clatter of wheels on cobblestones, and the scent of roasted maize drifting from market stalls. Here, every brick and courtyard carried whispers of generations long past, voices of elders reminding all who walked these streets that lineage was more than blood, it was duty. Families moved carefully, for honor was as visible as the rising sun, and a misstep could shatter a household's reputation. In the midst of this city, a child grew beneath the weight of expectation. From the earliest years, obedience was the language spoken at home, restraint the lesson repeated at every meal. Dreams were tucked away like secret treasures, only glimpsed in stolen moments under the shade of a mango tree or in the quiet of a candlelit room. Every act of kindness, every whispered prayer, carried the weight of silent sacrifice. Each day, the child learned that the family's needs came first, always first, and that stepping outside the boundaries of duty was a risk that could echo for generations. Inside, a storm of longing and quiet rebellion brewed, unseen by most, known only to the walls that had absorbed countless family secrets. School opened another world. Books and lessons offered glimpses of independence, of lives shaped by choice rather than obligation. For the first time, the child saw that it was possible to imagine a life not dictated by unyielding rules. Yet, even amidst these revelations, the invisible ropes of tradition pulled tight. Every action was measured against the eyes of ancestors, every thought weighed against what was considered right by family and community. The city outside promised freedom, but at home, the walls whispered, "Respect your roots, or lose yourself." And at the center of it all stood the father. Tall, imposing, his presence filled the room before his voice ever reached it. His word was law, his judgment absolute. To him, authority was the measure of love. To disobey was to invite exile from both heart and home. Every meal, every gathering, every instruction carried a reminder. Belonging required compliance, honor demanded obedience, and failure was unthinkable. The father's gaze was steady, commanding, and in it, the child learned the delicate balance of fear and respect, love and restraint. To live under his shadow was to navigate a world where every heartbeat answered to tradition, and every choice could either honor or destroy the family name. The memories returned like shadows in the evening, soft yet unrelenting. The sting of past punishments lingered, not as cruelty, but as lessons etched into the child's bones. Each raised hand, each stern look, each whispered command had been interpreted as care, a distorted measure of affection. "I only do this because I love you," the father had said countless times, and for years, the words had nestled among the confusion, planting seeds of obedience and quiet resentment. The child had learned that love could come wrapped in discipline, but also that silence often spoke louder than praise. In the kitchen, the mother moved like a quiet spirit among the pots and pans, her hands steady but her heart trembling. She watched, always watching, balancing her loyalty to her husband with the tender hope for her child. She spoke little, but every glance, every sigh, carried volumes. "Do not speak out of turn," she whispered one morning, not to silence, but to protect. Her love was measured in restraint, in small shields against harsh words and broken pride. She bore the weight of two fires, one of authority, the other of need, while keeping the flames from consuming the family entirely. Around them, the extended family lingered like the ghosts of judgment past and present. Aunt's eyes narrowed with quiet appraisal, uncles' voices carried subtle hints of comparison, cousins whispered among themselves, learning early the price of misstep. Every choice, every hesitation, every polite smile was noted, measured, and weighed. The home became a courtroom as much as a sanctuary, where tradition and honor held sway over freedom and whim. To falter was not only to shame oneself, but to stain the reputation of all who had come before. Amid this tension, Christmas arrived with its usual pomp. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats and spiced drinks, garlands of bright colors draped the doorways, and music floated from the radio with its familiar festive cheer. Laughter echoed through the halls, yet beneath every Merry Christmas and practiced smile, anxiety simmered. Conversations were careful, laughter rehearsed, and joy became a veil hiding the restless hearts beneath. Even as gifts were arranged and candles lit, an unspoken question hovered: how much of this celebration was real, and how much was a performance to satisfy expectation, to honor tradition, to survive another year under watchful eyes? The dining table stood at the center of the house, carved from dark mahogany that had seen generations come and go. Its surface gleamed under the dim chandelier, holding plates of carefully prepared food and the weight of unspoken rules. Here, the family gathered each day, sharing bread, laughter, and the occasional reprimand. Yet beneath the polished wood, tension lingered. It was a place of nourishment, yes, but also a stage where pride, authority, and fear collided. The table had held secrets, celebrations, and lessons alike, and tonight it would bear witness to the fracture of a household. The child, now grown, tightened the grip on the napkin, heart pounding. A life-altering choice had been made, one that defied the father's authority and threatened the family's honor. "I have decided," the voice whispered, low but steady, "to live a life shaped by my own hands, not by the weight of expectation." The words trembled in the chest before spilling into the room, carrying a courage born of years of restraint. Around the table, the family shifted. The air seemed to crackle with judgment, as if the walls themselves disapproved. The house had always remembered. Every argument, every punishment, every whispered betrayal lingered in the timber and plaster. The child's footsteps on the creaking floor echoed like echoes from the past, reminding all present that nothing was ever forgotten. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening, weighing the intention behind every syllable, every glance. Ancestral eyes, invisible yet present, observed from the shadows, carrying silent judgment. The elders of long ago, whose names were spoken only in reverence, seemed to whisper through the rafters, "Balance honor with mercy, duty with love, tradition with truth." A stillness settled over the room, thick as the incense burning in the corner. It was the calm before the storm, each breath deliberate, each movement cautious. Respect intertwined with fear, and anticipation hung heavier than the sense of roasted meat and spiced drinks. The table waited, patient and silent, as though aware of the moment to come. Every heartbeat, every glance, every unspoken thought was a drumbeat marking the approach of confrontation. And the child, standing at the edge of obedience and rebellion, felt the weight of lineage pressing down, but also the stirrings of self-worth rising within. The air in the house was thick, heavy with the quiet that often precedes confrontation. As the child, now grown, sat at the polished dining table, memories surged unbidden. He remembered the sharp crack of a wooden spoon against the back of his hand, the stern voice echoing in the dim evening light. "A lesson, my son, a lesson for the path ahead," his father would say. What had once felt like care now revealed itself as control, a weight pressing down upon the spirit. Each pang of recall brought a shiver of both fear and clarity. The laughter of childhood play had been punctuated with silence if obedience faltered, shaping a life of cautious steps and careful words. He thought of the times praise had been given only when perfection was displayed, every chore done precisely, every greeting bow executed without flaw. "Well done, only because you obeyed," the words rang again in his mind, a hollow echo of approval that had never been freely given. The seeds of resentment had taken root in that fertile soil of expectation, growing quietly alongside the longing for autonomy. Even now, the subtle shadow of those lessons shaped his chest with anxiety, a reminder that the love he had received was tied tightly to submission. The decision he had made was not merely personal, it was an affront to tradition. Choosing to pursue a career that honored his own passions, rather than conform to the family's prescribed path, felt like walking across a river of judgment. Every step taken in self-determination threatened the reputation carefully cultivated by his father. The weight of shame hovered like a vulture overhead, and he could almost hear the whispered, "What will people say?" carried by the walls of ancestral memory. Fear and defiance wrestled within him, shaping the tension that filled the room like a drumbeat before a storm. Around the table, relatives shifted subtly. The aunts exchanged glances heavy with silent commentary, uncles leaned back, arms crossed, as if to weigh the audacity of the child's choice. Cousins' smiles were tight, masking quiet amusement at the unfolding struggle. "Did you hear what he plans?" one whispered, just loud enough for another to catch. Observers became mirrors of societal pressure, reflecting the expectations, judgment, and traditions that bound them all. Some eyes brimmed with pity, others glimmered with the secret joy of watching authority challenged. The tension was alive, swirling in the room, pressing down on every word, every breath, every heartbeat. The house hummed with quiet unease. Though the festive table shimmered with carefully arranged dishes, the air between siblings was taut with invisible strings. The elder child smiled politely at the younger, but the eyes betrayed something deeper, jealousy sharpened by years of favoritism. "Mother says you have the gift for numbers, "But I worked twice as hard," the younger whispered under the table, voice trembling with both resentment and fear. Their competition had long been framed by the subtle nods of approval their father doled out, a currency of love that never flowed equally. Every shared glance, every quiet gesture, became a battlefield where loyalties were tested and betrayals masked by forced civility. Silence settled like a shadow over the room. The aunts and uncles, watching carefully, said nothing, each word weighed against tradition. Truth remained unspoken, for to speak was to challenge the household's hierarchy. Complicity grew in these quiet corners, a slow poison that seeped through family bonds. The eldest sibling looked to the mother, searching for reassurance, but found only restrained concern, while the younger swallowed frustration into a rigid smile. Each unvoiced thought, each withheld word, carried the weight of betrayal without action. The mother's heart ached quietly. She could see the pain behind her children's eyes and recognized the injustice in their unbalanced treatment. Yet her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the folded napkins, a subtle gesture of control and care. "Eat slowly, my children," she murmured, voice soft, yet taut with fear. Her love waged a silent battle against obedience. She longed to speak, to defend, but the father's shadow loomed, and tradition pressed her lips closed. Every step, every glance, every breath she took was measured, a delicate dance between nurturing and survival within cultural constraints. The father's pride flickered like a brittle flame. He noticed the tension, the flickers of defiance in his children's posture, and his voice thundered lightly across the room. "Discipline is the root of respect. Do not forget who guides your path." His authority, once unquestioned, now wavered in the public gaze of extended family. Each whispered comparison, each judging glance, was a reminder that power was never absolute when pride was bruised. He believed harshness shaped character, yet the quiet resistance of his children revealed cracks in the walls he had built around respect and fear. Outside, the invisible gaze of society weighed upon every movement. Whispers carried along the wind hinted at judgment from neighbors, cousins, and distant relatives. "What will people say if he disobeys?" A voice seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Even the laughter of the younger cousins was clipped, careful not to disrupt appearances. The family's actions, smiles, and silences were all filtered through the lens of public scrutiny. Fear of gossip, of shame, of social exile pressed down on the household, making even love and care feel like acts of rebellion. The walls of the house, and the unspoken expectations of the community beyond, coiled tightly around the family, a cage of tradition, pride, and survival. The family gathered around the Christmas table, its surface gleaming with carefully arranged dishes. Yet the plates remained largely untouched. The smell of roasted meat and spiced yams filled the air, but appetite was absent. The eldest sibling pushed the fork across the plate, eyes fixed on the cold, steaming food, as if moving it could also move the weight pressing on the family. The younger glanced at the uncle beside them, a faint tremor in the hands betraying discomfort. This looks wonderful," the mother said softly, forcing a smile. "Eat, children. Do not let the season go cold." But her words floated over the table, unable to pierce the tension that clung like a thick mist. The conversation was halting. Each word weighed with unspoken meanings, accusations, and fears. Even the laughter of distant cousins felt rehearsed, hollow, as though they were actors in a play that had lost its joy. From somewhere far off, the faint beat of drums echoed. The rhythm was steady, insistent, a warning. It stirred memories in the children, of lessons learned under discipline, of punishment disguised as love, and of authority that brooked no challenge. The coldness of the food, the untouched glasses of palm wine, became symbols in themselves, reminders that unity was fragile and hearts were guarded. The home, usually a sanctuary of warmth, now felt like a battlefield. The walls, decorated with woven tapestries and ancestral masks, seemed to watch. Every glance, every hesitation, was measured by eyes that both sheltered and judged. A cousin shifted nervously in the corner, recalling past missteps and whispered critiques, realizing that family love could sting as sharply as any reprimand. The weight of societal expectations pressed in, mirrored by the strict order of the seating and the father's vigilant gaze. Authority hovered above the table like a shadow. The father's silence was a tool sharper than any voice. Shame, carefully administered, had long shaped obedience. Every small frown, every pause in conversation, was a subtle reminder that social position and reputation were intertwined with compliance. Tradition, once comforting, now seemed cruel, enforcing loyalty through fear. The children felt it, a pressure pressing down on the chest, making it hard to breathe. Yet amidst the tension, there was a quiet before the storm. Fingers traced the edges of the bowls, eyes met and quickly averted, and the mother's hand brushed the table as if to smooth invisible cracks. Every movement, every hesitant smile, foreshadowed the confrontation that loomed. Silence, heavy and expectant, held the family in place, each heartbeat marking the approach of a moment from which there would be no return. The family gathered around the long, polished dining table, its surface reflecting the soft glow of a single flickering candle. Elders took their places at the head and sides, their eyes sharp as hawks, scanning the room. Each wrinkle and gesture seemed to carry the weight of judgment, the patience of ancestors who had seen generations rise and fall. The table, usually a place of shared meals and laughter, now became a stage where morality, tradition, and reputation would be weighed. Every movement of hands or glance of the eye was measured, catalogued, and silently recorded. The protagonist sat quietly, hands folded, heart hammering against ribs as if trying to escape the weight pressing from every direction. Past choices, the small acts of rebellion, moments of hesitation, whispered dreams, felt exposed under the scrutinizing eyes of a family who carried centuries of expectation. The aunts and uncles leaned slightly forward, lips pressed thin, their subtle murmurs like wind rustling dry leaves, hinting at approval or condemnation. The father's voice cut through the silence, deep and deliberate. "Why do you defy what has kept this family strong for generations?" His words struck like flint on stone, each syllable sharpened to wound. "You have brought shame where there should be honor. You forget the sacrifices that built this house, and you choose selfishness over loyalty." The authority in his tone made the air thick, almost tangible, pressing down on every shoulder in the room. Shame arrived like a heavy cloud, settling over the table and sticking to the skin of those present. Each accusation was a stone thrown, designed to crush dignity and bend the spirit. Eyes that once held warmth now reflected disappointment and judgment. Conversation died. Even the smallest whisper was swallowed by the weight of social expectation. The protagonist felt the pressure, every heartbeat echoing with the knowledge that family approval had a cost, and failure meant invisibility. Then the father leaned forward, voice dropping to a solemn, thunderous declaration, "You are dead to me." The words reverberated through the room like the deep echo of a ceremonial drum. Silence fell heavier than any punishment. Social exile, spiritual rupture, these were heavier than any lash or rebuke. The protagonist's chest tightened, a breath caught, as the family froze, the candlelight flickering across faces etched with shock, grief, and understanding. Time itself seemed to halt, the room suspended in the weight of ancestral eyes and the undeniable finality of words. Shock rippled through the room like a sudden storm over the plains. Faces paled, hands froze mid-motion, and whispers caught in throats. The elders leaned back in their chairs, eyes wide, mouths tight with disbelief. Siblings glanced at one another, unsure whether to speak or remain frozen in their seats. The mother's hand hovered over her chest, trembling, caught between fear and sorrow. Even the air seemed heavy, as if the ancestral spirits themselves had paused, waiting. In that silence, the protagonist felt the weight of isolation, each heartbeat echoing louder than the murmurs of judgment surrounding them. A strange clarity began to dawn. The years of obedience, of swallowing pride and dreams, collapsed in an instant. Fear, respect, and the habit of silence dissolved like morning mist under the sun. For the first time, the protagonist saw the cost of quiet compliance, not in punishment, but in lost self-worth. Every choice suppressed, every word withheld, now demanded recognition. A calm courage began to rise, steady and resolute, replacing the trembling uncertainty that had lived in the chest for so long. The shift became physical. The protagonist straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Standing tall, they faced the father, the elders, and the entire assembly, not with anger, but with a quiet command of presence. Every eye turned, the air shifted. Silence had been broken, and in breaking it, dignity returned. This was not a battle of fists but a reclamation of spirit. Authority could no longer dominate by intimidation alone. Truth demanded acknowledgement. Words spilled forth, deliberate and measured. "I have carried sacrifices that you never saw, bore burdens to protect this family even when ignored. I followed rules, endured criticism, and shaped my life not to shame, but to survive. Yet in the shadow of your approval, my voice has been silenced, my worth questioned. Loyalty cannot exist without fairness. Love cannot thrive where fear rules. I am no longer a shadow in this house." Each phrase cut through the weight of tradition like a ceremonial knife, exposing favoritism, hypocrisy, and blind adherence to rules over compassion. The room vibrated with the gravity of truth, and every family member could not turn away from it. The elders shifted uneasily in their seats. Even they, who prided themselves on wisdom and impartiality, felt the sting of their silent complicity. The father's face darkened, a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury, as the fragile illusion of control crumbled before his eyes. Hierarchy faltered. The room, long governed by fear and tradition, now hummed with the unsettling force of revealed reality. For the first time, the family confronted a moral mirror, and the reflection was uncomfortably truthful. A single candle trembled in the center of the room, its flame flickering as if afraid to witness the unfolding truth. Shadows danced on the walls, elongating the faces of those seated, turning stern elders into looming silhouettes of judgment. The ancestors, imagined and felt, seemed to lean from the corners of the ceiling, silent witnesses to every word spoken, measuring morality and weighing the sins of the family. The air itself thickened with cultural and spiritual weight, a reminder that this confrontation was not merely human, it carried the echo of generations. Shock rippled like a sudden gust across the family. Some froze, eyes wide, mouths faltering, as if the words had pierced the air and lodged in their throats. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Silence became suffocating, a tangible presence pressing against each chest. The rupture was more than emotional, it was social, a fracture in the invisible bonds of hierarchy and expectation. For some, shame settled like dust on their souls. Faces reddened, hands clenched, as the reality of hidden truths exposed them to self-reflection. The house, once a place of order, now bore witness to moral awakening. Family dynamics shifted imperceptibly. The hierarchy, so carefully maintained through fear and unspoken rules, wavered under the weight of honesty. Each soul sat uneasily, realizing that authority alone could not silence what was true. In the quiet corners, a few breathed a small, secret relief. The breaking of silence cleared a path long obstructed by fear. Though the truth hurt, it offered clarity, a chance to see the family beyond the shadows of pretense. Relief mingled with sorrow for the cost of confrontation, a reminder that honesty often comes draped in pain. The mother's heart fractured visibly. She pressed her hands to her chest, trembling, eyes glistening as tears threatened to spill. Silent prayers escaped her lips, whispered to the ancestors for guidance. Her love tugged her toward her child, yet duty bound her to her husband and the traditions she had always honored. Each breath was a struggle, a dance between loyalty and affection, illustrating the delicate, painful balance of nurturing within the confines of culture. "You have always spoken truth quietly, my child," she murmured, voice cracking. "I prayed you would stay safe. But perhaps it was time the world heard you." Her words hung in the air, fragile and trembling like the candlelight, carrying both sorrow and a quiet blessing. The room seemed suspended in the moment, the flickering candle and ancestral gaze bearing witness to the beginning of change. Pain, clarity, and courage intertwined, signaling that from this rupture, a new understanding, slow, careful, but real, would grow. The father sat heavily in the chair, his hands folded over one another, knuckles white from the unseen grip of authority now slipping. The words he had spoken, harsh, deliberate, hung in the air like stones. For the first time, he felt their weight not as power, but as emptiness. He had declared judgment, wielded tradition as a blade, yet the silence that followed was not obedience, it was absence, a void where connection once lived. No nods, no whispers of respect, only the echo of authority unanswered. He whispered to himself, voice low and brittle, "I have ruled, but for whom?" His eyes traced the empty spaces where a child's laughter and fear once intertwined with love and respect. It was a hollow victory, one that demanded reflection and, perhaps, the painful recognition that power without understanding nourishes nothing. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the household beyond its walls. Neighbors and relatives spoke in hushed tones, words dripping with curiosity at first, then thickening into thoughtfulness. "Perhaps the silence is not shame but truth," one elder murmured. Conversations that once celebrated appearances now considered moral weight, questioning authority, and re-evaluating tradition. Gossip had become reflection, and the judgment that had dominated the household slowly began to shift toward understanding. Inside the home, the elders exchanged glances, their faces softened by introspection. The eyes that once sharpened with societal expectation now lingered with questions. Could obedience without compassion hold true honor? Could power enforced through fear yield lasting respect? The seeds of contemplation took root quietly, unseen but undeniable, planting the beginnings of cultural and emotional introspection within the family's heart. The protagonist moved toward the door, shoulders straight, steps measured and firm. Each footfall was a declaration. Though rejected, dignity remained unbroken. The house behind them seemed to exhale, a release of tension mingled with sorrow, but the child of yesterday had grown into a person claiming moral and emotional freedom. Leaving was both an end and a beginning, the threshold between confinement and the vast, uncertain world beyond. The night embraced them as they stepped into darkness. The sky, vast and quiet, mirrored the uncertainty ahead, yet it also carried possibility. Each shadowed path hinted at trial, growth, and transformation. Walking into the night was not surrender, it was a rite of passage, a journey woven with the lessons learned from family, tradition, and courage. In the hush of evening, the protagonist's silhouette became both solitary and triumphant, a figure stepping into the unknown with heart and spirit intact. The sun rose slowly over the city, casting long shadows across the rooftops that still carried the whispers of ancestors. Months and then years slipped past, each day layering the past with quiet reflection. The storms of emotion that once raged within the household had softened, leaving traces like riverbeds etched in the soil, marks of struggle that now guided the flow of understanding. Memories of harsh words, rigid discipline, and silent betrayals lingered, yet they no longer cut like knives. Instead, they became teachers, engraving lessons into the heart of the one who had suffered. The protagonist moved through life with careful steps, each choice deliberate and rooted in integrity. Achievements were no longer measured by the nod of a parent's approval but by the strength of character and the courage to stand for what was right. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers noticed the quiet dignity in their walk, the steadiness in their gaze. "I walk for truth, not for praise," the protagonist murmured one evening, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Within the same household, the father sat alone, his hands resting on the arm of his chair. He watched from a distance, witnessing the growth of the child he had tried to shape through authority and fear. A quiet regret settled over him, heavier than any rebuke he had ever delivered. "Power without compassion, what have I built?" he whispered, voice rough with realization. The victories he had once counted, the obedience, the silence, the unquestioned authority, now felt empty, shadows of influence without the warmth of love or understanding. Among the elders of the community, reflection took root. Sitting beneath the ancient baobab tree, they spoke in hushed tones, voices carrying the weight of history. "Tradition should protect life, not punish the spirit," one elder said, tracing lines in the earth. Others nodded, their eyes thoughtful. Mistakes of the past, once concealed beneath ceremony and expectation, were now acknowledged quietly. A new understanding formed. The ways of ancestors were meant to guide, not to break, and the lessons learned from one family's trial would ripple outward, shaping a future where children might grow with both respect and freedom. The city continued its rhythm, blending the old and the new, but within hearts and homes, change had quietly begun. The protagonist carried the past not as a burden, but as a compass. The father's authority had softened, tempered by insight, and the elder's wisdom, tempered by reflection, promised that the chains of silence and fear might finally loosen for generations yet to come. The seasons passed like whispered songs carried by the wind. Within the household, the sharp edges of anger and silence began to soften, not overnight, but slowly, as rivers erode stone. Small gestures, an offered cup of tea, a quiet nod across the room, a lingering hand on a shoulder, spoke of acknowledgement. Words of apology, though sparse, were heavy with sincerity. The protagonist and the father did not rush toward reconciliation. The family understood that hearts cannot be mended like broken clay in a single day. Patience was the drumbeat of healing, each moment teaching that love and respect demand time to restore what was broken. Sitting beneath the baobab tree one afternoon, the father whispered into the wind, "A father who crushes the spirit of his child buries his own future." His voice, roughened by regret, carried the weight of understanding. Tradition, he realized, must protect life, nurture growth, and guide the young, not serve the pride of the elders or the ego of the strong. In the quiet shadows of the courtyard, the wisdom of ancestors seemed to nod, approving the lessons learned. The protagonist, walking along the path lined with flowering hibiscus, felt a freedom unlike any before. "I speak my truth," they said softly, "and in it I find life." Speaking truth had broken chains of fear and silence, but it had preserved the soul. Love, now recognized as patient and just, allowed them to grow without shame or concealment. The family, though still mending, embraced this understanding. Courage, honesty, and moral integrity were the true foundations of legacy. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the city seemed to exhale, carrying the story forward, of justice, of forgiveness, and of hearts learning to beat again together.